Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to break down the actual mechanics of human migration, using hard data to show how it truly works. There is so much political rhetoric out there about borders, human movement, and international aid, but we're going to ignore the noise and look strictly at what the research and historical data tell us. Our main focus today? A really fascinating concept called the migration development paradox. And trust me, it's going to completely challenge a lot of the assumptions you might have about why people actually pack up and move.
So let's dive right into the core question that literally drives billions of dollars in international policy. Can we actually use foreign aid and development money to stop migration? You know, governments around the world frequently propose using foreign aid, trade deals, and development funding as a fast-track way to improve conditions in origin countries. The explicit goal for a lot of policymakers is to remove the need for people to migrate in the first place. But does that strategy actually work?
Well, the data completely flips our intuitive understanding of how poverty and human movement interact. Our basic intuitive assumption is usually that more wealth equals less migration, right? We just kind of naturally think that if a country gets richer, its citizens will be happy to stay put. But the factual reality, which is backed by decades of data, is the exact opposite. Initially, more wealth equals more migration. Development isn't an alternative to migration. It's very often the exact thing that triggers it.
Section 1. The policymaker's migration myth.
The absolutely crucial point here is that the standard push-pull model, the one policymakers constantly use to justify aid as a tool to stop migration, well, it's fundamentally flawed. We have this illusion that poverty, violence, and misery are purely push factors, just forcing desperate people out. And this leads to policies designed to keep people, as researchers call it, down on the farm, basically building local infrastructure with the hope that they won't leave. But this completely ignores a massive, undeniable piece of data. The poorest countries in the world are actually the least migratory. Extreme poverty doesn't push people across oceans, it traps them exactly where they are.
This brings us to a really crucial insight from migration researcher Hein de Haas. We've got to stop viewing migrants purely as passive victims of circumstance. Instead, we need to start recognizing them as rational economic actors. Migration requires agency. It's very often a carefully planned family investment meant to reduce risk and improve long-term well-being. It's a deliberate, calculated choice to seek better returns on their labor.
Section 2. The inconvenient paradox.
So, if poverty isn't the main driver of migration, what happens when a country actually gets richer and starts developing? Well, here is the twist, and it's a massive headache for policymakers trying to curb mobility. It's called the migration development paradox. This is the totally counterintuitive phenomenon where economic and human development in low-income societies initially accelerates emigration rather than reducing it. Let that sink in. Pumping development money into a low-income country doesn't keep people at home. It actually catalyzes their departure.
You can clearly see this paradox in action looking right at this data from the Global Bilateral Migration Database. Notice where the dark bars representing immigrants actually peak? Right in the middle. Not on the left with the very low-income countries. It's the middle-income countries that are the main drivers of global migration. Countries like Mexico, Morocco, Turkey, and the Philippines consistently figure prominently as origin countries simply because they've reached that middle tier of development.
And the reason for this is honestly pretty simple. Extreme impoverishment deprives people of the money, the connections, and the knowledge they need to move. Moving, especially internationally, requires significant resources. You have to pay for travel, secure visas, or sometimes hire smugglers. If you're extremely poor, you suffer from what researchers call involuntary immobility. You literally just cannot afford to leave.
Section 3. Capabilities and aspirations. Let's break down the exact mechanics of why development actually sparks movement. First up, capabilities. Like we just said, you can't migrate if you can't afford the journey. Development literally buys people the capability to move. When a country gets better infrastructure, like new rural roads, or when families get a slight bump in income from, say, agricultural success, that money doesn't suddenly make them complacent. No, it gives them the actual cash and the logistical means to finally make the trip they've been wanting to make all along.
But at the exact same time, development changes minds. And this brings us to aspirations. As people get more education and internet access, their mental horizons broaden. Their ideas of the good life completely change. They move away from wanting local pastoral or agricultural jobs, and they develop the desire to seek much better returns on their new skills abroad. Think about it. If you just got a high school or college diploma, you're going to look for a specialized job that matches it, right? And that very often means moving to a major urban center or another country entirely.
As we can see on this chart, as development increases along the bottom axis, both the capability to move and the aspiration to move shoot up in tandem. It's a double whammy. Development provides the money to leave and the education that makes you want to leave. They both rise sharply together before eventually leveling off at much, much higher stages of societal wealth.
To apply this neutrally to the real world, let's look at sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, it's actually the least migratory continent globally when it comes to moving outside its borders. It's characterized by very high involuntary immobility. But it's also the target of heavy international aid aimed at development instead of migration. Now, the data tells us clearly what's going to happen. This massive aid sent to sub-Saharan Africa will inevitably enable and inspire more people to migrate over the coming decades, not fewer. As incomes and education rise there, Africans will likely form an increasingly large share of future global migrants. The policy is quite literally achieving the exact opposite of its stated goal.
Section 4. The Migration Transition Curve. So if development increases migration, does it ever stop? Well, researchers call this the inverted U. Notice how the line for emigration rises sharply as a country begins to develop and gain wealth. But as you continue moving to the right, once a country finally achieves high-income status, emigration drops. And at that exact same point, the country actually transforms into a net destination for immigrants, which you can see by that rising line at the bottom. This step-by-step transition explains so much of world history. In Phase 1, an agrarian society, people are trapped by poverty. In Phase 2, as a country industrializes and urbanizes, wealth and education increase, and this newly empowered population starts emigrating internationally in huge numbers. Finally, in Phase 3, it reaches high-income society status, emigration stops, and immigrants start arriving. Guys, this perfectly explains the mystery of why European emigration historically skyrocketed to North America in the 19th century, exactly when Europe industrialized, and it's exactly the pattern we're seeing in emerging markets today.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why migrants take the risk. Comparing official development assistance to personal remittances reveals a staggering truth. The personal financial return migrants send back to their families absolutely dwarfs all official foreign aid combined. It's not a desperate flight. It's a highly rational, incredibly effective investment for a family's future.
Section 5. Redefining human mobility.
To wrap up our explainer, we really need to completely change how we defined human movement to better understand global economics. Comparing our old assumptions against the hard data reveals a completely new reality. We used to think migration was the opposite of development. The reality is it's an intrinsic part of it. We assumed migrants were just desperate victims. The reality is they are rational economic actors investing in their families. We assumed the poorest move the most. The reality is the poorest are involuntarily stuck. And most importantly for policymakers, the assumption that aid will keep people at home is simply false. Aid endows people with the financial and educational means to actually move.
Ultimately, as the source material points out in a fantastic quote from researcher Ronald Skeldon, migration isn't a problem to be solved by development. Migration is development. When a society modernizes, its people become mobile. It's a natural, inevitable byproduct of increased human capability and freedom. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to really spark your curiosity. If human movement historically proves that the world is getting richer, more educated, and more connected, why does our political rhetoric continue to insist it's a crisis that needs to be fixed? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this data helped illuminate the fascinating reality behind global migration.